morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the places at Hawk Blogger. And it's Friday morning, which means only one thing can be true. We get to talk to our good buddy, Mike Sando of The Athletic. Mike, how are you doing on this fine Friday morning?
I think better than you. You've got a little cold going, and knock wood, I'm holding up okay. So
Ugh.
hope you feel better.
I don't know like what happened, but every time I've traveled for
Yeah.
covering the Hawks for the
Oh yeah.
last two or three times, I've come home just sick as a dog. I even went as far this time as to wear a mask. I hate wearing those masks. They're so annoying. I wore it the whole flight down to Mobile. Still ended up like catching who knows what. It's not COVID, but apparently my
No.
friend Evan, he was at a work event in LA. He said it was like a super spreader. Everyone got sick
Oh
there
yeah.
as well. So
Yeah. Oh yeah.
maybe it's just not avoidable anymore.
Hey, when COVID first broke, I was actually in Boston at the Sport Sloan Analytics conference, and people were like, when we first got there, they started walking around with the hand gel. We had no idea this was going to become a pandemic, and like I can actually remember Louis Riddick. I was working at ESPN. He didn't show up for the thing, and I was like, "Come on, Lou. I mean, I had we had no idea this serious. So we're all standing around talking to each other, just wide open." But I find that too with traveling. Like, to me, hotel rooms are tough. The air
Yeah.
conditioning
Yeah.
systems, you wonder, do they've changed those filters? One
Ugh.
time, my first year at ESPN, I thought, oh my gosh, I've made it. I'm at ESPN. Unbelievable, right? I'm going to I'd gone to the Super Bowl at the News Tribune, but I thought, we're going to the Super Bowl. This is going to be first class accommodations. Well, down in Phoenix, they have so many people that go that we were in a bad hotel. It's not like they have three press credentials and you get in the main hotel. So we're in this place with like a 24-hour diner in the parking lot. I got sick for a year. Whatever I breathed, dust or something out of that hotel room, like, I'm not kidding you, I had a blanket over my lungs for a year. So travel to me really introduces you to risks and things you don't even know about. You're breathing stuff, and you're thinking some of these dingy hotel rooms. You're like,
Oh,
do you think they changed the filter on this thing in the
they
last 10
don't.
years?
There's no way. And I mean, I came from tech. So I was used to like when I would travel with Adobe, and I traveled a lot, but I'd be staying at the Intercontinental, I'd be staying at the Fairmont, I'd be staying at
Yeah,
like
nice places.
$500 a night, hotels in San Francisco. And, it was amazing. And now it's on my dime for this little venture that I'm in. I'm staying at the Holiday Inn Express Airport, in Biloxi, Mississippi, and oh my God, the only
Yeah.
place to eat was a Hooters next door.
Hey, I've used that
So
excuse too. You know that me and John Clayton have eaten at a Hooters before together? That's a great
that
sight.
does not surprise me, and I think it sounds familiar too. How
Yeah.
did it go
Yeah.
for John? I bet he was very popular at Hooters.
Well, it was not very. No, I had a different Hooters story with Jerry Austin, the old rules official at ESPN, where we were at a Hooters in Mexico City. So I have a few Hooters places stories. But yeah, John Clayton and I in Indy, and I think it really was like a situation where you end up there when nothing else is open. Kind of, it's like I don't like their food. I mean, do I want to go because of the waitresses? I mean, come on. I mean,
Mike, it sounds like you're a frequent, attendee. So
oh, well,
maybe.
I've been in. So here's I think I've been to three. I've been to Mexico City with Jerry Austin when we couldn't find another place that showed all the games. John Clayton. I mean, this all sounds really hot. Jerry Austin's about 75. Clayton, looked like he was 75. And then I think the third time I went, my wife and I went as a joke. We just said, "Hey, let's go to this Hooters." So that's my Hooters inventory. Oh, John Gruden. When I used to go to John Gruden's quarterback camp, he was like buddies with the founder. So he was always like, "Hey, here's a gift card or something, or whatever, that sort of a thing." That's my exposure to Hooters.
All right. So out of all of that, Mike, I'll tell you one thing that stuck out to me. You went to the analytics conference. Is that something that you've gone to multiple times?
Yeah, I've done a bunch, but the problem now is they schedule it during the combine. So
What?
yeah, so what happens? Well, it's all sports, and
Yeah.
the Sloan Analytics Conference is you get a lot of analytically inclined people together, so that's great. You meet people. The NFL teams will often have their analytics folks or A couple people go to it. So sometimes those people, if they're at the combine, will leave and go. I just decided once they do it during the combine, I'm not going to leave the combine for that because it's really a 36-hour event. Kind of at the end of the week, it's usually like you'd want to be there Friday, and then it wraps on Saturday afternoon. And it's not as good as it used to be, only because analytics isn't as new as it used to be. I think when it wasn't everywhere and you didn't have access to as much data, it was really cool just to go to see what they were talking about, and you were learning about how this works. 15 years ago, I couldn't give as good of an explanation of what some of these metrics are, right? But now we use them. We have a pretty good understanding, and to go to it isn't quite as valuable. But I wish they would have it not during the combine because you do meet people. There's a lot of the students from MIT are there, a bunch of them, really sharp people, and there's people that are presenting papers there for discussion, and some of it's really some of it's really detailed, but it could be like, hey, here's a new tracking system for hockey pucks or something. Just
Yeah.
you decide to go sit in and listen to the guy or gal who uh, developed it or did the paper or did the study. And then if there could be 50 people in there, you could hop out if this really wasn't your thing and go. You might have there's another one going on about the evolution of the 3-pointer in the NBA or something. And for me, like, I'm totally interested in that stuff. I just don't get to read about it much. I'm not. It's not in my wheelhouse because I'm busy with NFL. But I love to like sit in on that. In fact, I've got this is a book that I got there by Kurt Goldsberry called Sprawl Ball, and it's got all of these graphics and stuff in it about how like the evolution of shooting has changed in the league, in the NBA and stuff,
Uh-huh.
the strategy behind it. So like getting a chance to be exposed to like a book like that, like I'm totally interested. That book, I sit there with my sons or something and go, look at this. This is Steph Curry's shot chart as a rookie. And then let's look at it every year. And it just evolved as the game evolved, right? That's really interesting to me. So you can run into stuff like that with NFL too, or football, football type stuff. And it's really good.
There's so many thoughts running through my mind as you're talking about that. Like, one is I would bet that the percentage of people attending that conference that are involved with betting, sports betting, has probably been increasing over time.
That's
Right?
interesting. I don't know that. I haven't been in the last few years because I
I
don't
would
think I've been
bet
since the pandemic. I think that was the last time I went.
like the that is one cohort of users I bet is or attendees that's growing. The other is probably um, oh my gosh, it just left my mind. But the other
Yeah.
piece I was thinking about is it being directly connected to the timing of the combine. It's like the scouting community versus the analytics community.
A little bit.
And there's already this kind of a little bit of light animosity there, I guess, maybe heavy depending on what your perspective. If you were to a lot of actually like people that dream of potentially being a sports reporter listen to this show. I get a lot of,
Yeah.
I'm sure you do as well. A lot of people ask,
Uh-huh.
if you were to tell somebody, give them advice, you
Mm-hmm.
could only go to one of those two events, the combine or the sports analytics conference, to help you become a great reporter for the next 10 years covering sports. Which do you think you'd recommend?
Well, the combine for sure, because there's way more NFL people there. Now, that being said, you're not going to necessarily be able to meet all of them, but there's just way more people there. So, like, let's just say the Seahawks at the combine might have their entire scouting staff and their entire coaching staff there for various times, not the whole time. So you get all that, and then they may have, I'm just going to make it up, 3 analytics people or 4 or something that go in, and they may be there for a shorter amount of time. Then they're going to bounce to Sloan. Maybe 2 of them bounce to Sloan. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
making that up, but that would be a normal type of a thing. Sometimes if you have an analytically driven, you know, cap person, they may go. I can remember a really fun one, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. Parag Marathe, who is like CEO of the 49ers and used to be their cap guy, and Kevin Demoth, who's like the CEO of the Rams and used to be their cap guy. They're both still involved in that world, but their jobs are bigger. They were both on a panel together, and I was covering the NFC West at the time. And so that was way more valuable to me. That would have been more valuable because I got to actually sit with those guys and listen to them. And they were talking about each other's rosters because it's like February. You would never have that. Like these guys are, you're just not going to have those guys together. And then talking kind of candidly because they're friendly or they're friends and they're kind of joking with each other and they actually give analysis of the other team's roster. Like I mean, that was unbelievable. That's one that I really remember going, that would be great. But the combine gives you way more opportunities for just meeting people, seeing them in a social setting, late at night, that sort of a thing. So
I
it's
remember
its own event. Yeah.
the other cohort I was thinking about is investors. So like
Mm.
the amount of sports like business innovation that
Yeah.
probably comes out of some of those papers. So it is fascinating, and I've got more questions for you about the combine. I'm hoping I haven't gotten my approved credential yet,
Hmm.
but waiting on that.
You've been before though, right?
I have not. I've
Oh,
never.
okay.
This week was the first week I went to the Senior Bowl, so I did that. Assuming that'll happen, will be the first time I go to the combine. I may go to the owners' meeting. I'm not sure. I don't know when that happens or not. But
That'll
if
be
I
in
keep getting
March.
sick, then maybe
Yeah.
not.
That'll be in March in Florida for the league meetings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
So I'm curious at the combine. Like everybody, a lot of people think about it as the testing days and when the guys are on
sure.
the field. Do you get there before that, and is there actual value in being there before the actual combine events begin?
Oh, for sure. I never even, for me especially. Now, if you're going, if you're going and you're covering a specific team, um, that's a little bit of a different job than what mine is. So they will have some. Usually, they would have John Schneider and Mike McDonald will be available at different times. For any media who's there to at a press conference. And then what'll happen is typically they'll step off to the side. You might get a few follow ups, and then sometimes, depending on the coach, depending on the team, they will arrange, hey, just a beat writers only session. And those could be on the record, off the record. Sometimes the off the record ones are valuable. You're going into the off season, for example, and let's just say you wanted to ask the GM, "Hey, do we need to be worried about everyone's asking me, are you guys going to make this trade or something? Is this something we need to be worried about?" And he may, dodge it or may say, "Hey, we've had no talks on anything like that." That sort of thing could be really valuable, just as just to get a better feel for what is and isn't going to happen this offseason. So from a team standpoint, you're on the Seahawks. You don't want to miss any of that. And then you also, because they will make available certain players, you may decide, hey, this is a big year that they're going to draft. Let's just make it up, a guard. So you know what?
Unheard
Yeah,
of.
I know, unheard of. But let's just say, hey, there's these three, and I want to get a chance to talk to these guys because I may do a piece on them later or whatever. I have a few questions. So there's a lot of that is kind of on the books. It's a little bit scheduled, and the league is involved, and you need your credential to be in that area. And then there's a whole another world of where just almost anywhere around that convention center downtown, you may just run into anybody. But if you have to be responsible for everything on a team, it's harder to just not be around where your team guys are. But for me, I can bounce around a lot of different places, see a lot of different people, uh, and as the years have gone on, I'll sometimes have meetings set up with people that I know. Hey, I see you. Let's get together, have breakfast. Have lunch. Hey, you know, uh, come by my hotel, whatever, that type of stuff. That's really grown for me because I just know a lot of people now and I'm way further down the road. When I first started out, I mean, I can remember being there probably, I guess the first year I went was January of 99. And so Holmgren had just been hired. And I was just like, I was nervous every day of like, am I going to get to talk to him, or am I going to have anything to prove that I was there? Right. Can we have a sit down session? I was so eager to get just things on the record. I wanted to be able to talk to the coach. Whereas now, I go there knowing I'm going to talk to a bunch of different people, but not always knowing who it is and not worried about, I don't have to turn a story the next day on a certain
Hmm.
team. So I'm really freed up to me maximize the combine and all
Makes
the people that
sense.
are there. Yeah.
Well, and that kind of leads me to a question I've been curious about for you. So when I was down in Mobile, and Jim Nagy does a great job. Like they do a great job down there. It's a cool town, good food, good people. The experience, seeing all these, college prospects go against each other, and trying to make their dreams come true. It's a really cool thing. If you love football, it's a great place. You got Brian Baldinger's everywhere. You got every different every different guys out there. But one of the things that kind of occurred to me, Mike, was seeing John Schneider shoulder to shoulder with Mike McDonald, and
Oh
having
yeah,
them follow around the offensive lineman. Trent Kirshner was there as well with them. And obviously, Mike McDonald couldn't be there last year. He wasn't even part of the Seahawks at that time last year. He hadn't been hired.
right. Big difference, huh?
Big difference. and it made me kind of wonder. You've had so much experience getting to know these different executives on the personnel side, on the coaching side. What do you find that dynamic to be like? And the ones that work well, what do you think that dynamic is like? And in the ones that don't, what do you think that dynamic is like? And I'll give you a little bit of a specific. You can go take this any direction. Like, how much does the power dynamic affect that? Like, if the GM is the actual person that hired the coach versus the coach
Right.
being like, how do you find that all works?
Well, I think it varies by organization. Go big picture. There are organization-driven scouting teams. Like the Steelers are looking for the same type of player every year, and that's just a Steeler way. So they've only had 3 coaches, in forever, and so that is pretty much just a machine that probably runs itself, right? And they have a certain type of player they're looking for. Then I would say like the Packers are scouting department driven. They they don't have an owner, of course, and they're very much a long-term. They're going to be one of the younger teams every year, and they have a scouting strategy and a scouting focus. I feel like the scouting department, as much as or more than the coaches, leads what they're going to do. Then you could have a team like the Cincinnati Bengals, who have traditionally had smaller staffs, and they've relied heavier on their coaches for the evaluation part over the years. That's been a very normal thing for them. So their coaches actually, have to do the scouting, and that's been true for them for a long time. So there's some of those things that happen. I think if you have a coach who's empowered, you get alignment pretty quick, but your scouting department may not always be as happy, right? Because that coach could steer you certain ways. But think of this for alignment. Let's just say you have an aligned division. You still have on a team an owner, a GM, a scouting staff, a head coach, coordinators, special teams coach, position coach. So ideally, every one of those people would be on board about this wide receiver that we like, right? What if the GM, scouting staff, head coach, coordinator really like this receiver, but the position coach doesn't? You've got a dilemma, because the position coach is going to, can this guy overcome that, right? Do we want to put a guy in this guy's room who he really wants this other guy? That can become really challenging, and there's story after story. I know a lot of specifics on this that are obviously not public, that I've learned in confidence of somebody who they didn't take this guy because the position coach or because this other guy, the head coach, really wanted this. And I'll give you some Seahawk examples. Like one of the most famous ones, there's this great old picture of Chuck Knox when he was coach of the Seahawks, with a really upset look on his face because the owner wanted to draft Dan McGuire as the quarterback. Chuck Knox wanted Brett Favre. And Chuck wouldn't come. Yeah, Chuck didn't refuse to go to the press conference. Like, he was very surly about it, And so, that type of thing can happen.
Where I don't think I've ever heard that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've written about it before. Like, I think we talked about it on a podcast, or I've written about it in maybe a book that I wrote with Steve Rabel 20 years ago. But there's this great picture of Chuck, like, not happy, that was a well-known one. And sometimes those types of things get out when, Favre ended up being good. So now we find that out. What if Chuck had wanted McGuire, then maybe we never learned that. You know, there's a
Right.
lot.
Right.
Look, believe me, there's a lot of stories of. I'm trying to think. There was a great one like Ron Wolf. You know, and this could be self-serving too, but like he was, you know, they were seconds away from picking Ray Lewis, and then you know whatever happened. You know, there's the draft's filled with what ifs and things that could have turned out a different way. I think we've talked before about the importance of the offensive line coach. You know, and like when the Seahawks had Alex Gibbs or Tom Cable, they're looking at a different type of offensive lineman than John Schneider might go for if he was just building his own team, right? You have to take all of that into account of, hey, what fits well with our team. So when you have that alignment, you know, when the coach has a clear vision for how they want to play, it becomes easier for the scouting staff to find that type of player. Even if the scouting staff themselves would prefer to have different types of players, they can really all be on the same page. Hey, Pete Carroll wants long corners, right? I mean, they got good ones. Even though if John Schneider was running his own team without Pete there, maybe he likes a different type of corner, right? But he wants the kind that's going to work for his coach because so you can win.
It's fascinating as they kind of play out. You know, I'm imagining these power dynamics. Okay, let's say you've got like what the Seahawks have right now, which is a GM that's responsible for the coaching staff and has final say essentially on personnel decisions. And let's say that they have an offensive lineman that the GM likes, but the
Sure.
offensive line coach does not.
Yeah.
And ultimately,
Yep.
let's say the GM goes and says, you know what? I'm making the call. We're going to take this guy. I think he's the better player. And then the position coach, maybe, you know, I've known a surly offensive line coach or two. Maybe he decides, you know what? I'm going to bury this guy in the depth chart. I'm not
Yeah,
going to
that
play
could be a
this guy.
problem. Yeah.
Then you'd think that you'd play that out, and John Schneider would be like, "Dude, like you work for me. You will play this guy." But it's probably not that simple, right?
No, and then the head coach has to decide, does he, you know, want to back his position coach or, you know, push back on this? Or I think we saw some of this a little bit, you know, at the end of the Pete Carroll era when there were probably some younger players on the team that, you know, you would think the scouting staff might want to see more of, right? And that totally happens. I think one of the things I learned early on, especially with offensive line coaches, I can remember, but it just depends on the coach. Some of them really want veterans in there. They're easier to coach. They know what to do.
Yes.
And so there's some position coaches who would rather have a B level veteran who knows exactly what he's doing than an A talent who is going to need a lot of coaching and is going to mess up in the game, right?
Yes.
Would you rather have
Yes.
an all pro quality guard who, you know, in the fourth quarter is going to miss his block, or just a solid starter who's going to get, you know, ragdolled 4 times during the game, but he's always going to be in the right spot, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not just coaches that feel that way. I remember distinctly on the, 2011, 2012 and beyond Seahawks, the defensive players, the linemen that were there, like Chris Clemens, good example, like talking about how much the veterans mattered and how much like having guys that knew what they were
Mm-hmm.
doing mattered. And then there was guys eventually later on, Frank Clark comes in and they could see how talented he was,
Sure.
but the players don't want to be surrounded by young guys that are figuring it out. And so it is. I don't think it's an accident, Mike, that John Schneider re-signed D. Eskridge last year to come back on a 1-year deal. I don't think it's an accident that he signed Tyreek Smith to the practice squad, the one draft pick in 2021 or whatever it was, 22, that didn't pan out. Like, I would bet he wanted to see some of these guys under a new coaching staff because he felt like they didn't get the right opportunity to shine under the previous staff. And so I think this is a dynamic that just a lot of folks don't appreciate, that goes into massively like foundational
Hey,
decisions.
well, what if you had 20 people running your fantasy team every week and you had a hierarchy, right? Or something? It'd be hard.
Yes.
Who we
Yes.
starting this week? Oh, then the other guy had the huge game. You know,
It's, I
I
think
told
that
you. I told you.
I think that's absolutely it would give people some insight into that, and you don't get it in normal quote normal jobs, right? Like,
Hmm.
you might hire somebody and then maybe someone else likes somebody else as the hire. And it's not like that person goes on to have some storied career and you're like, see, we made the wrong, like that happens a little bit, but it's not as
Yeah,
common in pro sports. This is a very highly visible, they're asked to do the same kind of positional responsibility in someplace else. And it's very clear from a public perception standpoint and generally from an ownership perception standpoint whether you made the right decision or the opportunity cost was not, was too high. So
yeah,
uh, it's also interesting to me because you get this dynamic you talked about with the coaches. Like, the head coach has to decide. He may report to the GM in this case, but he's also making the decisions. Seahawks hired Clint Kubiak. All right.
sure.
That happened this week. This is really, from my understanding, quote, 100% a Mike McDonald decision. This was not a shared decision. Like, obviously, John Schneider's going to have say in it, but this was Mike's call. And for now, like, when Clint Kubiak comes in and he has ideas of the type of offensive lineman he wants, does he bring in his offensive line coach, all those kinds of things, you're going to have Mike McDonald in a situation, I think, that's going to be a little bit different now than even what he had last year, where he was very deferential to John Schneider, really acknowledging that John is in charge. I think he
Yeah,
still will have that mindset, but now he's got someone who he knows he's betting somewhat his career, his current Seahawks career on, in Clint Kubiak, and he's going to want to get Clint who he wants in order to succeed.
sure. But also, then Mike and John know each other way better now. I don't wouldn't always think of it in terms of that they'd be at odds on something. When you really know what even better what each person wants on each side of the ball, you can do a better job scouting, right? You can just be unified in what you're looking for. So I wouldn't necessarily see that as unless Clint Kubiak has some sort of outlier views on types of players that he wants. I'm sure he'll have his opinions, but what would be interesting there to me is, hey, how much does he care about how good the guards are? That sort of thing could be interesting. Do we got to have one, or hey, not that important to me? I think that type of uh, that type of information or input could be good to know as they kind of move forward.
Yeah, we talked to Ted Wynn of The Athletic this week, who wrote a great article on Clint Kubiak, and he noted that both the Kyle Shanahan and the Kubiak offenses are pretty reliant on the center more so than others in terms of
Yeah,
making line calls and things of that nature. And that if you look at Kyle Shanahan's best years, it's when he's had a really good center. And
sure.
so that may be a position that's of more importance
Hey,
now than it was a week ago.
and so Kyle, so remember the 2016 Falcons, Kyle Shanahan was the offensive coordinator when Matt Ryan had an MVP year. Their big move in free agency was to get Alex Mack, center.
It was. And he
Yeah.
brought him to San Francisco as well,
Yeah.
the last few years of his career. So, yeah, I found myself observing Mike and John this week, as we
Yeah.
talked to Mike Sando of The Athletic. And, um, they were like, there's a lot of conversations that go on those sidelines of the Senior Bowl between the coaches and the personnel, between personnel and other personnel execs. Like, there's been some interesting stuff caught on tape, from NFL films and so forth. Um, how much do you think that that's an advantage, or is it an advantage, I should say, to be able to, if you're not going to be in the Super Bowl, to be able to be down there, working together on kind of evaluating these players versus having the personnel department get out in front and then the coaching staff catches up later?
I think it's an advantage to be together, looking at the players. I know different teams have different ways of doing this. The Rams don't even send their staff to the combine, right? So, and they've drafted pretty well. So I don't think you have to do that way. But I think in general, there would be value to be able to stand there with the people you're making decisions with, seeing the same thing and talking about it.
What is the dynamic with the Rams? I haven't quite been able to figure that out because we see these videos of, Sean McVay acting like the GM, like last year, wanting to trade
Hmm.
up to get Brock Bowers, wanting to trade up to get Byron Murphy, having a really strong opinion on these players. We've heard that in the past that he's had guys that he specifically wants. How much of it's Les Snead making these choices and finding these players? How much of it is Sean McVay from your perspective?
Well, I think Sean McVay is more empowered than most coaches. I do think they work well together. I think their process, and I'd have, Jordan Rodriguez, our writer at The Athletic's written about this a lot. I believe they're like way earlier. They're doing evaluations uh, real early, I believe, in the process, and so um, theirs is definitely different. Without, like I said, not sending to the combine, I think they're largely film based. I believe. I don't want to talk out of turn because I would need to refresh and reread some of that stuff, but I think it's been interesting, and I do think they work well together. But Sean McVay is, you know, definitely a powerful coach.
So, I mean, honestly, a story that I haven't really read that much of, and I'd be
Hmm.
fascinated to read, is comparing and contrasting how teams approach their scouting and personnel and how coaches are involved or not across various
Yeah.
groups. And I don't feel like I've got a good sense, and I think there's a lot of nuance to it. One group that, or one
Hmm.
organization that has a pretty fascinating turn of events was the Jacksonville Jaguars. You wrote about this this week, and
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what's gone on there, where they were, and how they got to where they are now.
It's funny. I can remember a few combines ago. Every time I was at the combine, I saw Trent Baalke and Doug Peterson like always together. And then I felt like I didn't see them together as much the last year. So I don't know if I was reading anything into that. I actually joked with one of their people about that. I was like, "Hey, where are these guys?" But yeah, so that was a weird situation because Trent Baalke was already there before he was the GM. They hired Urban Meyer, and then they promoted Trent Baalke to be the GM. Well, Urban Meyer's obviously going to be, probably the power coach, and it doesn't seem like he would be super easy to work with. So they have a disaster year. Get rid of Urban Meyer. They bring in Doug Peterson. It seemed like Doug Peterson and Balky, like I said, I thought they seemed inseparable when I saw them early on, and I joked that I didn't see them together as much later, but obviously it must not have been as good as things went along. But they decided to keep Balky coming out of this last season and fire Peterson until they, I guess, determined that it was going to stop them from getting Liam Cohn, who they wanted to hire. So they fired Balky. To me, that's weird. Just weird stuff. That organization just doesn't, to me, just doesn't know kind of what they're doing. And I think that's been proved out over a long period of time. They've had probably some good people in there, but just not the right combination at any given time. So, we'll see where that goes now. And they haven't even announced, they haven't announced their GM yet, have they?
No,
Yeah. So, they're going to find somebody to work with their young offensive coordinator, head coach.
Duval.
That was
That.
great. I love to watch the press conferences, but you never really know if that then means he's a disaster or not. I think if you can connect with your players and help them get better, and they know you've got their interest at heart. Like I think you can do a weird Duval. And we've seen different types of coaches. Dan Campbell got ridiculed out of the gates. McDonald seemed quirky. Not Mike McDonald. McDaniel seemed quirky.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think there's just different ways to do it. But no doubt, watching that first one, you're like, and also in the context of this is the Jaguars, you're watching that going, okay, I need to probably be proved that that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Jonathan Gannon was super
Yeah,
awkward
he was
for
little.
Arizona.
Yeah,
I was like, this guy's going to be a disaster. He didn't seem like he was interacting with players normally. They've done pretty well, so that's the one to me where I'm like,
that
okay,
hasn't been a problem. That hasn't been their problem, Gannon. I think yeah, you're
no.
right. So I think there's just
Generally,
different.
Generally, I do think it matters. I think, your EQ and your ability to be relatable and someone that people are, you know, Pete Carroll's a perfect example of this. I don't know. I'm assuming you watched the press conference or have seen it, but like,
Yeah,
he has such a way about him, Mike. I mean, the fact that Marshawn Lynch, of all people, shows up to
yeah,
that press conference and then like comes and gives him a hug out, like he's magnetic. Like there's something about Pete where he could make all sorts of other mistakes, but his players are going to always love him. His coaches are going to love him. They're going to be around him. They're going to want to play for that guy. You can't like develop that. Either you've got that or you don't.
yeah,
And
yeah.
if you don't have it, you're going to have to make up with it for it in other ways by being an excellent, schematic coach or other
Yeah,
things.
but it's not just his personality. It's that the players know he has their best interest at heart.
Yes.
And so I don't think he's a super skilled, speaker, and he could handle any situation. You could drop him into any crisis and you probably wouldn't even have to talk to him ahead of time about what to say. Like he could just do it. Whereas Liam Cohen isn't ready to do that right now. But Liam Cohen could still show his players that he has their interest at heart, and not only that, he can make a difference on game day, and he can put them in their best position to win. He can still do that even while being a little bit, you know, off with some of the delivery and that sort of thing. Those things
Yeah.
can become a little bit endearing. Jim Harbaugh, is uh,
Yes.
can be off-putting. I've said before, the first time I ever had an interview with him years ago, I thought I was totally blowing the interview because he's kind of wasn't looking, and all this stuff. That's just him. It wasn't had anything to do with me at all. And his players, it seems kind of corny, some of the stuff, right? He's singing for "He's a Jolly Good Fellow" in the locker room. Are you
Yeah.
kidding me? You would
Yeah.
normally, if you read about that without knowing anything, you would say that's a doomed coach and no one will play for him. And the guys
Well, not
play
only
for him.
that, I mean, I know some stories about when he
Yeah,
was at Stanford. I mean, he's done some things to players that made enemies for life out of some of those guys. So like,
interesting.
you could be all of that and still like he's also had players that I mean just love playing for him. And if you think about Mike McDonald's not the most engaging magnetic personality. That's not like his number one strong suit. But the way that he I think gets players behind him is when things went wrong this season. He was not he was not leaving them out to dry. He was stepping in front of those arrows. He was taking that.
Sure.
He also like when there was a player or players that weren't actually helping or actually hurting other players on the field, he brought in guys that were better and, actually getting results and then actually getting a defense that plays well. All of those things are things that players do care about because ultimately, if you're Julian Love, if you're, Devin Witherspoon, and you play your position perfectly as you're supposed to play, you make all the right decisions, but the linebackers aren't getting their drops properly, and it's making it look like you're giving up a pass, but it's really on
Right.
the
Right.
linebackers. You're not going to say that, but it's going to be frustrating to you. So having a coach that actually like attends to that, there's other ways without being like the most magnetic personality to
Yep.
get players behind you.
Yep. And you can have the great personality and lose the players when you aren't consistent with what you're doing, or right, or you, uh, and that sort of a thing. So, and
Well,
that can happen to even to a really good coach. We learned over the years of some of the defensive players resenting the treatment of Russell Wilson or that sort of a thing. These are all
yep.
difficult situations to handle, and in the end, Pete Carroll's gets the respect of the players. Even those guys who were frustrated with him at that time, they're all buddies of him now. They all respect him. They know he
Yep.
was doing his best and had their interests at heart. But some of those things are very difficult to navigate and really have a right answer for everybody.
So, Mike, I'm curious on the Clint Kubiak hire.
hmm
Any other thoughts that you had when you heard that decision was made? Any reactions from you?
Yeah, I thought it was probably the best hire they could have made of the ones that were out there. So, I think I've heard good stuff about him. Both from when he was in San Francisco and in New Orleans. I think he would have been a logical person for New Orleans to retain, but it seems like they're going to go for an offensive head coach who will have his own system. So I think they're fortunate to get him. I had also heard that there was a decent chance he could have gone to Cleveland with Stefanski, he's worked with before. So I think it's a good get because for that, I think he's good. And then from what I've heard, he'll be able to just handle the offense. I think it'll be maybe liberating for Mike McDonald to not have to feel, as much of an oversight or worry about what they're doing. And then a clear vision of how he wants to play, which is going to include the run game. I think that is very comforting to Mike McDonald. So I can't see any reason why the fit would be bad. I've heard good things about his personality. We know what the scheme is. We know what the lineage is. And, I don't know. You think of a thing that concerns you?
I mean, he hasn't had outstanding results yet. Like, if he'd had outstanding results as an OC, he'd be a head coach most likely by now. But I don't personally find that concerning. But I think if you're looking to like poke a little bit of holes, his offense in Minnesota was a step back from when his dad was the OC, although it was still a 12th to 14th ranked offense that year. And
I think they were really hot out of the gates with the Saints, and then you have to determine, did he get figured out or did they get hurt or both? I know they got hurt. So
I think the hurt part seems very clear. How good? Yeah. I think we still have to see.
Yeah. One interesting thing, that I was looking at with them, and I think I talked to someone who covers the Saints about this. It might have been on X or something. We were going back and forth. But one thing I noticed about the Saints and Derek Carr this last year, he only played about 10 games, but Derek Carr's sack rate was like unusually abnormally low. Yes. Like incredibly low.
Yes.
Like I was like,
he gets rid of the ball very fast.
A misprint. And so I think it was lower than it was before. I think it was like abnormally low. So I believe it was somebody who was covering the Saints replied to me and said that, that was kind of one of a good thing of Kubiak was he got, the sack rate down. Well, would anybody like a lower sack rate in Seattle? I mean,
no.
I mean, I think you might take a lower sack rate.
Yes.
At this point. So, I think Geno might take a lower sack rate. So it'll be interesting to see. And it'll be interesting to see how Geno fits with it, right? The whole thing, there's going to be an adjustment. It's a different type of offense than what they've done.
Yeah. One thing I heard, Mike, and this isn't verified, but I think it's pretty accurate from the people I was talking to. The assumption was Hank Fraley was the first choice, and after he went back to Detroit, that they went to Kubiak. I actually don't think that was the case. I think Clint Kubiak was the first choice, and what took some time was Clint Kubiak was kind of waiting on this Saints decision to figure out whether or not he could potentially stay there. And because he didn't want to move his family necessarily, and they were settled in New Orleans, and there was a chance he might be able to stay. And so when, to your point, it became more clear that wasn't going to happen, then he was able to make his decision. I'm not saying that's 100% accurate, but I think that I trust the people I was talking to that gave me that
sounds right. That sounds right to me.
And if that's true, talk to folks for a second about, I think fans do not understand and do not appreciate. I think media members even choose to forget this, how much a factor it is for players, coaches, GMs, like everybody, about whether they take a job in Seattle. Like, Seattle is in a different part of the country. A lot of football is southeast or maybe northeast, maybe Midwest. But like, even if you go to college football, like the Pac-12 was so often like people don't watch it. They ignore it. Like, how much does that factor into whether players, coaches, whoever are even willing to consider going up to Seattle?
I think there's still only 32 of these teams. And so if you don't, it depends, I guess, what your choices are. So it could probably, it may be a factor if you had a couple of somewhat equal choices. But I think for the most part, people will go for a place of advancement or what they perceive to be a good situation. But I do know coaches who, take a job for 1 year on the West Coast and their family's back on the East Coast, and then they're going to try to figure it out the next year because it's hard with the kids in school and that sort of a thing. Just moving around in general, but all the way to the Northwest when your family is likely somewhere far away, I think is a consideration, but not a deal breaker when if you have a chance to advance.
Yeah.
And that sort of a thing. One of the interesting things I just put up on my screen with Kubiak coming in, So Kubiak was 30. He was 33% under center on early downs, and that's the fourth highest in the league last year. So we go Ben Johnson, Wes Phillips, which is actually Kevin O'Connell, Mike LaFleur, uh, which is actually Rams, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Kubiak is the highest. It's interesting to me because Ryan Grubb is at 12%, down at the almost at the very other end. And I'm interested in seeing, when you're under center, you're turning your back to the defense.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that increasingly people don't do in high school and college on their way up
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a different thing to take your eyes off the defense. And when you're in the gun, you can kind of see everything, and there's a little bit of comfort to that. You give up some things that you could do in the running game, but as a quarterback, you can kind of see everything easier. I think that's a interesting component when you look at these teams at the top of under center. So it'd be Jared Goff, who's been in the league a long time. It would be Sam Darnold this last year, who's been in the league a while, but whatever. I think of Kirk Cousins there. Stafford, been in the league a long time, right? Carr in the league a long time, probably done this type of system. So we should look at, what percentage of Geno's career he's been under. We should look at under center. We should look at his production under center, some of that type of stuff. Maybe you know that off the top of your head, but that's the biggest change with this offense is you're probably going to be in the top 5 or 6 in the league for how much you're under center on early downs. And that's not for everybody. It's not a comfort zone for all the quarterbacks.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a huge, huge difference between what the Seahawks saw last year from Grubb and what they'll see under Clint Kubiak, and I think it changed for the better. But time will tell.
I'm going to pull up
Um,
Geno's career splits. Just under. Do you know what it would be under center and not?
his under center has actually been pretty good, and his
Yeah,
play action has always been pretty good, which is generally better. Like play action is more effective under center than it is at shotgun, and so I think those splits are a little bit better in that regard.
yeah,
But off the top, I don't have the exact numbers. I see you working feverishly to
yeah.
get
I'll
there.
I'll I'll get it. But I mean, yeah, you can continue with whatever you're doing. If I find it, it's great.
Yeah. So, I mean, on the location bit, I think you're absolutely right on the coaching stuff is a little bit less of an
Mhm.
impact because there's generally it's not like true free agency where you've got a bunch of people trying to get you. With players and free agency, I think it's a pretty significant factor for players that have a lot of choices. I think it's harder. I think Kevin Zeitler is a great example. I think the Seahawks wanted him multiple times, and he's
Okay,
like,
yeah,
I don't think I'm going to go out there. And I think the factors include also, how good your team is and, the
sure,
culture. And
sure.
that was one of the benefits of a coach like Pete Carroll is players talk to each other
Yeah,
and they're like, this is a great place to play. And how many players signed in free agency that heard from somebody else that this was a great place to play? It matters. And in fact, there was a there was a TikTok video that Robertson Harris' wife put out after he got traded to the Seahawks this year. So this is Mike
yeah,
McDonald,
yeah.
and she talked about the per diem being higher here, the fact that they let the players be with their wives the nights before the games here that they weren't able to do in Jacksonville, like a whole list of things where it's like we are with a class organization all of a sudden going from Jacksonville to Seattle. So if you don't think that factors in and that players talk, I mean, obviously you do, but I think fans underappreciate
Yeah.
how much that can affect things.
I think it does. I think it affects how you feel when you're at a place, but I don't know that you can see a lot of situations where the guy said, "You know what? I could make 2 million in Jacksonville, but I'm going to take 1.1 in
Yeah,
Seattle."
yeah,
I don't know that it's that much of a driver. Just like for anybody
agreed.
else, when you're making a decision on a career, you may decide, uh, well, I think in I think when you're in the NFL, you accept a certain amount of we're going to have to move around, right? There's some people just in their careers or whatever that they're not going to take a job in a different city, right? That's just a fact
Yep,
because you don't have to.
right.
In the NFL, you go where you can have an opportunity, and when all else is equal, where you live is a factor. where you're going to live is a factor, but a lot of times all else isn't equal. So maybe, in a Seattle situation, for some guys, it's got to be more money.
Yeah. Did you find your Geno
Yeah. So
number?
here's what I found. So, so really, he, I think I did this since 2021.
Are
He's
you
got,
are you able to eliminate this past year? Because the under center work this past year I felt like was pretty poorly designed.
yeah, I can take it out. You want to do just 21 to 23?
Yeah.
What I noticed was there's just not a lot of under center. It was
Mm-hmm.
so if we do that, it's 680 pass attempts from shotgun and 176, from under center, and then the completion percentage is the same. The yards per attempt is much higher on under center, which is normal, like 9.2 to 7.4. The
Hmm.
you know, it's 8 touchdowns to 2 interceptions with 109 rating under center, 31 and 12 with 98.8. That's taking out this last year when Geno had a lot more interceptions.
Yep.
And so the sack rate is higher under center. I think that's a little bit interesting. This
Yep.
is all early downs also. The explosive pass rate is higher under center. I think we expect to see
Mm-hmm.
that. And then the team offensive EPA per play is actually a little bit higher from the gun, and I'm not sure why that would be when some of those other things are the way they are. But
Yeah, that can generally be that the interceptions he had were more costly under center, or um, that they
yeah,
scored more points per, like, whatever. The
yeah,
EPA has a couple oddities in it that
it
can.
does like that. Yeah, and you can usually figure it out if you do include this last season. It's I think it's similar. I think it's
Yeah.
similar. So, you're going to get more yards per attempt, more explosive plays. It looks like possibly a higher sack rate, but we'll see with Kubiak because that was supposed to be his. They didn't have that in New Orleans, so maybe you get the best of both worlds. Geno's sack rate low under center and more explosive. We'd take that, wouldn't you?
Every coach would, every fan would as well. Mike, it's been great catching up again this week. Tell folks what they should be looking forward to from you. You got any ideas what you're going to do for your pick six yet?
I do. I got a pick six Monday with no games, but I'm really yeah, I'm kind of looking at some stuff on the Eagles and their offseason coming in and just contextualizing it. I think there's been a lot of talk about what did the Eagles do? What
Mm-hmm.
because getting Saquon Barkley is a pretty big ad, and they did the two coordinators as well. I think they're an organization that seems to push for better or worse. They're always kind of like caffeinated, aren't they? Aren't the
Yep.
Eagles like they're going to maybe make a knee jerk decision during the year, but they're also going to be all in and try to get better every year, right? And when you
Yep.
look at like, that's been a complaint of Dallas is they're just sort of this, mid-performing solid stock that just never gets you rich, but is solid in your portfolio. And so I think as we look around the league, you know, should Buffalo be doing what Philly's doing, or you know what I mean? There's just as an organization, when do you push? Is something I'm kind of interested in and may look at. So.
I think that's a fascinating one. And it is interesting, even if you just step back to the Final Four team. Well, I guess it was the final,
Mhm.
it was before that, but two of the better teams in the league this year, the Baltimore Ravens and the Philadelphia Eagles, did something that generally is frowned upon, which is spend big free agent dollars on a running back.
Yeah.
And
And yeah,
yeah,
I was thinking of that. Sorry, I'm getting myself something to drink here. It's a soft drink, don't worry. But yeah, if Saquon Barkley, it would have been totally not surprising if in week 5 he suffered an injury, right?
hmm,
And let's just say their season could have gone totally differently. And people would be saying, "Up, cautionary tale, told you."
yeah.
And instead, it's one of the great signings. I mean, he's redefined their team.
Well, one of the
So,
angles that I
yeah.
really this is a theory I would have on the Eagles and Howie Roseman in particular is I think every GM, every scout has positional specialization where they're good in some positions and maybe not as good in others. And like John Schneider, people get upset about the offensive line, but he has a really good history with receivers, for example. He's had a pretty good history with offensive tackles, actually. He's had a pretty good
Yeah.
history with cornerbacks and secondary.
Hmm.
Like he's had some pretty
He
good
got a pretty good quarterback. I mean, he
quarterbacks have
was
been,
driving Russell Wilson.
yeah,
That's pretty good.
absolutely. So, but Howie Roseman, his specialty is the trenches. He always drafts defensive linemen early. He drafts offensive linemen. He's done really well. There was a time, people forget about this. This was not that long ago, a few years ago. Philadelphia fans hated him because his drafting Jalen Reagor and like his receivers, his skill position decisions were awful. They had nobody who could actually threaten a defense. And so what has he done? He's changed his approach to he trades for or signs
Yeah.
those positions once they've already
Yeah.
proven to be good. He's traded for AJ Brown. He is signed Saquon Barkley. And so it's an interesting way to kind of approach your deficiencies as a scout to say, here's what we're great at. We're going to draft those. But we still need these other players, and maybe we need to look at different acquisition mechanisms to get those guys instead of just continuing to bang our head against the wall.
Yeah. They've done a really good job. You look at the last Super Bowl they went to, they got AJ Brown, remember?
Yes. Yes. Well, and that's
But you look at this, go back to 2004, they got Terrell Owens, even
yes.
that's before
Yes.
Howie was fully in charge, but I can't remember if he was even there then, but he might have been.
This is why, Mike, I'm just pounding the table over and over again that John Schneider needs to spend money on free agent offensive linemen. Like
Robert Gallery.
Another reason he's got to do that. Just drafting another young player, I think, is a really, really dangerous move.
I get you, but did you see the $20 million a year guard market last year? Do you want to be in that?
Well, so this is the thing, Mike. Overdrafted and overpaid is true for the players you're talking about that were last year. Trey Smith is worth every penny he's going to get.
Yeah. And the Chiefs went and got Joe Tooney before. They're like, hey, they got their butts kicked up front by the Bucks in the Super Bowl, and they're like, we're going to have to address this.
Yeah. So, like, I think you get what you pay for if you know who you're trying to get. And I think Trey Smith's a guy who is worth it. I think Mekhi Becton's another guy that's going to get paid pretty well. I think you know what you're going to get there. And so, yeah, this is kind of, I don't necessarily believe they're going to do this. But if you look at, to me, one of the lessons of Howie Roseman, it's know your strengths and figure out ways to complement to address your weaknesses as a scout. And
find a way to ask Schneider that. The way to get answers to these questions is to ask them in the right ways.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to say, hey, could you do as good a job as Howie on this? Because that's not even necessarily a representation of what's happening.
Right.
But and even the premise can be rejected, of your question sometimes. But
yes.
But I find that, like, if you think about these things enough, there's a way to get at what you're getting at in a way that doesn't alienate the person you're trying to ask, right?
Yes.
And that is an art. And that is something that, you have to bring humility to this, because you don't have the answers. We don't have the answers. We don't know.
No.
We couldn't do a better job.
No.
But we think we have some interesting premises, right? And you want to... And these are things they think about too. So, if you can find the right way to get into something like that, it could be a really interesting discussion.
100%. Mike, thank you so much and thanks to everybody for putting up with my constant coughing and sneezing on, if you're watching, you were seeing it. Hopefully you didn't have to hear it too much, but Mike, have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll talk again next week.
Absolutely. And I'll give you one more. The other key to getting those answers is don't ask it during a press conference.
Interesting. Yeah. So when would you ask?
If you really want to find something out, I mean, look, you're not asking them for who they're going to draft.
Right.
You're really trying to learn how things work. You want to know that. Once you know that, then you can analyze. And you don't put the person you're interviewing on the spot. You're not trying to get them on the record to say it. You don't need that. You want to know how it works. Those are good philosophical type questions, but if you ask it during the draft press conference, when someone has no time to think about it and they know it's going to be used somewhere else and they didn't like your tone or whatever, it's just easy to not get what you're looking for. To me, if you want to know the answer to something, well, ask somebody where they're not in a threatened manner. Hey, what do you think about this? Am I crazy?
Yeah.
Is this not how it works? Enlighten me. You might get a great answer, and then you're not going to go turn the story the next day and say that's what they said, but you're going to have a 50% better understanding in what you're doing. That's
Do you approach them like after they finish a press conference? When do you run into them to
well,
have that
yeah,
conversation?
at the combine or whatever, you may see
Hmm.
somebody, but you have to develop that type of, when people know you're when people know you're trying to figure stuff out, and you're not trying to just catch them.
Hmm.
You're not
Hmm.
just trying to get the story you know, that gets you clicks that day. When you're
Hmm.
really trying to learn, when you really have a learning mindset, I think most people in any profession, would like to have a conversation with you. So, yeah, maybe it's developed at a combine or, during training camp or whatever, you may have a chance, but uh, it takes time to build up that, rapport or trust to get the occasional opportunities. And you may only get that one chance once a year. Maybe at the combine when, like I said, sometimes a team will make the GM available to just the beat reporters, hey, I want to ask you something, and then you got to make sure, or maybe you say, hey, when we're all done here, I just had one thing I wanted to ask. It's not for a story. I'm not going to write a story on it. I just really want to know, uh, you may be able then to
Hmm.
get sort of an answer, and it may be a bad answer. You may be totally disappointed,
Yeah.
but to me, those are better ways to go about things that than putting somebody on the spot when the lights are on and everybody's going to use it in their story tomorrow. That's not always the best way to get something interesting.
Folks, this is why this guy has built as many solid relationships across the NFL as he has. Mike Sando, the best in the biz from The Athletic. Make sure you follow him and check out his Pick Six column will come out next week. So, Mike, have a great rest of your weekend.
You too. Thanks.
All right. That was Mike Sando. Really, really great stuff as usual. And I want to get to super chats here before I bounce here. Bryce Coots with his daily Hawk Blogger membership gift gives away 10 Hawk Blogger memberships. So many free memberships available. All you got to do is make sure you've got memberships turned on for your account on YouTube. You got to watch the show. You got to like and subscribe. Everything you do to interact with the show increases your chances to get one of these free memberships. And Bryce is giving them out by the bushel. So really appreciate Bryce for doing this. And hopefully you enjoy your free membership when you get one. Dogzilla Monster asks, are the Hawks facilities relatively good? Yeah, the Hawks facilities are excellent. First of all, the VMAC being right on the water is amazing. The actual weightlifting facility has got these rolling doors that opens out to the field, so it's open air. It's top notch. It's a great facility. It's close to the city, so you're not like way out in a suburb somewhere. Yeah, it's a huge selling point, and I think they did that intentionally. The spot they had in Kirkland was not a selling point. It was a fine facility, but it was not, state of the art. And Paul Allen, among his many gifts to this organization and this community, was to spend real money and build a true class, top of the league kind of facility for the Seahawks, and that's helped attract coaches, players, scouts, and others throughout the years. All right, folks, appreciate all of you. I am going to head out and try to rest up. I will see you tomorrow. Hopefully, Jeff Simmons will be available. We'll do Seahawks Saturday, and we'll keep this thing rolling. But until then, this has been episode 312 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Take care.